Hey guys, welcome back to another Saxon video, lesson 90. This is going to be a super fast video, let's hope. Okay, so I remember it was like a few weeks back, Jayla was like, why do you keep using that word coefficient? And I was like, because it's the right word to use. And I didn't have time to go into the definition of coefficient at the time because we were talking about something different. But today, let's talk about that word. Coefficient, right here. A coefficient is the number that is multiplied by a variable in an algebraic term. So this number in front of x is called a coefficient. Okay, so when we say that we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, right, because that's what we would do to solve for x here, we're multiplying by the reciprocal of the coefficient. Okay, that 4/5 right there is a coefficient. So let's review this equation right here and how we solve. Remember, when we have 4/5 multiplied by a variable, in this case it's x, equals 7, we multiply by the reciprocal, or multiplying by our coefficient here, because we want to get rid of the coefficient. We want this gone because we want x all by itself. And the only way we can get rid of the coefficient is if we multiply by the reciprocal. And in this case, the reciprocal is 5/4. So we multiply by 5/4 on one side, and if we do it to one side, we do it to the other side. So here we have, again, 5/4 multiplied to this other side. 5/4 times 7 gives us 35/4. So we've multiplied by the reciprocal of our coefficient to solve for x. That's what we're going to do today. But we've already been doing this for a while. We're going to add mixed numbers and negative numbers to it. Okay, so let's look at example 1. Here we have 3 1/3 x equals 5. So the first thing we should remember here is that we have a mixed number. So step 1 is we want to change our mixed number to a fraction. So let's change that. 3 times 3, 9, plus 1, 10. So we have 10/3x equals 5. Step 2 would then be to multiply the coefficient by the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply by 3/10 on both sides. Now step 3 is to solve it. Well, this cross cancels out, so now I just have x by itself. 5/1, I'm going to turn that into a fraction, 3/10. Notice here that I can cross cancel. My 5 goes into my 10 once, or excuse me, 2 times. 5 becomes a 1, 10 becomes a 2. So that becomes x equals 3/2. And we can leave it in its improper form. All right, let's look at example 2. I have the steps already ready for us. Okay, step 1 is to change our mixed numbers into fractions. So we have 1/2y equals 1 7/8. Okay, 2 times 2 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So we have 5/2y equals 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15. So we have 15 over 8. Okay, step 2, multiply by the reciprocal, right? We want to multiply by the reciprocal of our coefficient. So we're going to multiply by 2 over 5 on both sides. Now we can start to solve. Cross out my 2's, cross out my 5's. This gives me my y all by itself. So I have y equals 15 over 8 times 2 over 5. And notice here, cross cancel if you can. And I can. I can definitely take 15 and 5 and turn that into a 3 and a 1. And my 2 and my 8, I can cancel out. So now I have y equals 3 over 4. Okay, let's talk about negative coefficients now. Here is an equation with a negative coefficient. We have a negative 3. And I want you to look at this in two different ways. First, let's look at it the way we have been solving problems like this. If I have a negative 3x equals 126, if we did not have the negative sign in front of our 3, we would just divide by 3 on both sides. But because we do have our negative sign, let's just divide by a negative 3 on both sides. Well, if I divide a negative 3 by a negative 3, then I just get a 1. So that becomes an x. Now I have 126 divided by negative 3. And 126 divided by 3 is 42. A positive divided by a negative gives me a negative. So this becomes a negative 42. Now I want you to look at this in a whole different way. I'll set up the problem again. Negative 3x equals 126. Now think about this as a coefficient, negative 3, and multiplying by its reciprocal. Well, what is our reciprocal of negative 3? Reciprocal of negative 3. Well, what's our reciprocal of 3? 3, the reciprocal would be 1/3. So our reciprocal of 3 is negative 1/3. So we could do that, and we could multiply by a negative 1/3 on both sides. If we do that, notice how we're still getting a positive x, and I'm still taking 126 divided by 3 over here to get 42. And because of this negative sign, I still have a negative 42. So if you were to ask me which way do I prefer this first method right here. But I want you to know that dividing by the reciprocal, or excuse me, multiplying by the reciprocal is the same as dividing over here. Multiplying by the reciprocal is the same. Okay, so now let's look at example 3. Here we have a negative 2/3 x equals 4/5. Let's look at our steps. Turn our coefficients into fractions if we need to. Well, they're already into fractions, so we don't need to do that. Okay, step 2, multiply by the reciprocal. Okay, so we have a negative 2/3 x. Our reciprocal of negative 2/3 is going to be negative 3/2. So we want to multiply that on both sides. So let's set up our problem here. Negative 2/3 x equals 4/5. fifths. And we're going to multiply this reciprocal on both sides. Finally, we're going to solve it, and we're going to cross cancel if we're able to. So the negative 3's cancel out, our 2's cancel out, and we're left with x equals 4 over 5 times negative 3 over 2. And looky there, I can cross cancel my 4 and my 2. So I end up with a negative 6 over 5. And here we are at our last example of the day. Negative 5x equals 0.24. Okay, number one, turn into fraction. Well, we don't need to. We have integers. We have an integer, we have rational numbers. We don't need to turn anything into fractions here. Okay, multiply by the reciprocal. Well, instead of multiplying by the reciprocal, I'm just going to divide by negative 5. Now I could multiply by a negative 1/5, right? So I could multiply by a negative 1/5, or I could just divide by 5 on both sides. Either way, you're going to get to the same place. So I divide and then you solve. Well, this cross cancels out to give me x. And now I have 0.24 divided by 5. So let's do the math on that. 0.24 divided by 5. Remember, our decimal goes zoop, straight up. 5 goes into 2 0 times. 5 goes into 24 4 times. Uh-oh, I hope I have enough room. Looks like I'm going to make it. And then we have 8. So our answer would be 0.048. But guess what I forgot to do? And I hope you caught my mistake here. This is a negative 5 and a negative 5. So our answer is a negative 0.048. All right. Okay, go do the practice set in the Google form and then submit your written practice odd numbers in the written practice Google form. I miss you guys. Have a good night. Bye.